Can you remember what life was like when you were a child? Are you like me around the holidays, reminiscing on things when you were young, throwing snowballs and making snow angels and writing letters to Santa and leaving him milk and cookies at night, on Christmas Eve tonight, anticipating what's going to happen on Christmas morning? Then Santa would come on Christmas Eve, and in the morning you'd open your presents that were nicely signed by jolly old Saint Nick. Then as you matured, somehow you found out that it was a fantasy, and you had been misled into believing in something that did not actually exist. Then as an older and more mature thinker, maybe you attended a church or a temple and wondered if there were other lies or deceits. Perhaps you wondered what else in life was a fantasy. Perhaps you began to question the commonly held belief in a life after death. Perhaps you wondered, what if there was no afterlife? That death was the end. No heaven, no Zion, no nirvana, no paradise, just the end of your life. Perhaps you realize that in 500 years or 300 years or 200 years, all of the things that you have done, all of your accomplishments, your life, all of this would be for naught, that it would be all forgotten. Our mission here at the Church of Perpetual Life is to end aging and defeat death. Tonight we shall remember all of the approximately 220 patients currently in cryopreservation. We shall hold a light for these men and women and children until we shall all meet again in a brighter future. We shall now remember the resurrectables. I'd like to invite you, if you're interested in doing so and you feel comfortable doing that, to come forward and light a candle for those who are in cryostasis. And if you're comfortable speaking on the microphone, the names, we're going to get to that point as well. There are short biographies of the 70 resurrectables that have made their cryopreservation suspensions public. At any time during this process, you can also come forward and light a candle for those that have passed. Maybe they're not in cryostasis, and if you'd like to say a silent prayer, you're welcome to do so as well. Or to say a prayer for a cryonaut who is the cryonaut of the future. The first cryonaut was Dr. James Bedford, and Adam's going to bring that up now. Dr. James Bedford is the first person frozen under controlled conditions for possible later revival. Dr. Bedford was a serious man of pleasant disposition who made many friends. In 1966, the 73-year-old retired professor became the first cryonaut, the first person to make advanced arrangements for cryopreservation, which was carried out the following January by the Cryonic Society of California. After years of private storage by relatives, he was transferred to TransTime in the 1970s, and now is at Alcor. Don't be afraid to wear overalls, the practical-minded psychology professor would tell his students. Dr. Jim knew many honors, wrote books on vocational guidance, taught for years in California schools, and undertook several wilderness expeditions. Chase, would you? Chihiro Asoimu, Margaret Bradshaw,
Joseph G. Cannon and Teresa M. Cannon. Born in Wisconsin in 1915, Joseph George Cannon studied engineering in college and became a licensed consulting engineer in the early 1940s. Around mid-1945, he married Teresa Terry Mackey, who would be his wife for many years. Terry was born in Michigan in 1916 and was an elementary school speech correctionist by profession. Joe boasted that in 39 years of marriage, they never had an argument, though they did have disagreements. The Cannons purchased property in Florida and started spending their winters there. Returning to their home in Wisconsin for the warmer months, Joe and Terry had a long-time interest in cryonics, which culminated in their cryopreservations at Alcor as an unusual married couple who both have exercised that option, Joseph G. Cannon and Teresa M. Cannon. Fred Chamberlain II. Fred Jr. was the father of Fred Chamberlain III, who with his wife Linda founded Alcor in 1972. Born in Berkeley, California in 1897, he soon moved to Plainfield, New Jersey. He entered Brown University, Providence, Rhode Island in 1914, but left during World War I to enlist in the U.S. Army. He married Elizabeth in 1928. For a number of years, Fred Jr. renovated and operated a farm in Keswick, Virginia, and lived at several residences in that state. In 1968, he lost his wife to a sudden coronary, condition and moved to California. Now past 70, with his wife Linda, Fred incorporated Alcor in 1972 and was cryopreserved on March 22, 2012. Among his many talents, Fred wrote inspiring poetry and loved to play the guitar and keyboard. An accomplished engineer, he was the first to standardize a scientific cryopreservation protocol, built the first perfusion equipment himself, and put it all into a manual so others could duplicate this work. He was a pioneer in involving cryonics out of the mortuary. Fred is still a part of all of us in the TerraSound collective consciousness, and we will continue to enjoy his warm creativity again soon. Lyubov Chernaya. Lyubov was a therapist and a loving mother of Valery Udilov, the director of CryoRes. John Knoll. John Knoll was a member of the Cryonics Institute since 1991. John was at one time the contracts officer, the CI, the person who verifies that members' contracts are completed. John worked in the aerospace industry before he retired. Dr. Eugene T. Donovan. Gene was a psychiatrist. He had always wished for immortality, but believed that science and medicine would someday provide for it, but he also believed that it would never be within his personal reach until he found out about cryonics. Cindy Donovan said Gene was dying, Gene wanted to be suspended, and Gene needed to die with what he called a dream in his pocket. So he decided tonight to do everything possible to make that dream come true. Wesley Ducharme and Viola Rose Dufault. Viola is the grandmother of CI member Kevin Boyle. She appeared on television interviews with Kevin in response to journalists' interests in Kevin's dog, Thor's cryopreservation, and he was a CI member herself. She attended the 2006 annual general meeting at the Cryonics Institute with her current son Kevin, where she was thrilled to meet and have several friendly conversations with Robert Ettinger throughout the weekend. Viola Rose Dufault was born in Haverhill, Massachusetts on January 9, 1919. During most of her working career, she was an office manager for various Boston area companies. Viola was a very outgoing person. She enjoyed traveling and made friends easily. She was also a voracious reader. Dr. John Erfurt. Elaine Ettinger, Robert Ettinger's first wife. May Ettinger, Robert Ettinger's second wife. Ray Ettinger is the loving mother of Robert Ettinger. Robert Chester Wilson Ettinger. Robert was an American academic known as the father of cryonics because of the impact of his 1962 book, The Prospect of Immortality. The book said that future technological advances could be used to bring people back to life. He is considered by some a pioneer transhumanist on the basis of his 1972 book, Man and Superman. Ettinger founded the Cryonics Institute and the related Immortalist Society. Ettinger became an overnight media celebrity with many published articles and television appearances and radio programs in which he promoted the idea of human cryopreservation. Since the commercial publication of The Prospect of Immortality, all those active in cryonics today can trace their involvement directly or indirectly to the publication of one or both of Ettinger's books. Lydia Fedorenko. Lydia was a teacher of mathematics in St. Petersburg, Russia. She loved life. There were her friends, family, and of course, all the former math students she had taught over the decades. She wanted to extend her life by another 200 to 300 years. Her son, Danily Fedorenko, said her last wish was eventual resurrection. FM 2030, Feridian M.S. Fenderi. Prominent futurist, author, and longtime cryonicist, FM 2030 became an Alcor patient in July 2000. In the 1960s, he gained prominence for 3 novels, The Day of Sacrifice, The Beggar, and Identity Card. In the 1970s, he started a popular series of books about the future, which came to include Optimism 1, Upwingers, Telespheres, Are You a Transhuman, and finally Countdown to Immortality. He changed his name to FM 2030, hoping to remain active to the year he would celebrate his 100th birthday. He had a strongly positive view of life and in the future. In an introduction of Upwingers, he summarized this feeling: "My regret is that I am not optimistic enough. It is not possible to project the fantastic worlds which will continue to open up to us in the coming years. Worlds which will far transcend my most daring optimism." Dr. Andrea Foote, Helmer Fredrickson, Arlene Frances Fry. From Her Blue Eyes Will Sparkle by Linda Chamberlain. Arlene's blue eyes sparkled as she told the hospice nurse, "I feel wonderful." Her voice was weak, it trembled as she continued. "My mother was quite a character, a great role model in many ways, and a woman who became a strong cryonics convert in the last few months of her life. We made a promise long ago to meet again in the future at the most elegant lounge on the moons of Saturn, overlooking the rings and to toast the old days, the struggle to survive. It will become a centennial event, meeting to share travelers' tales and being there together. I know Arlene's blue eyes will sparkle as we toast to success and to being together again." Michael Louis Friedman. Michael was an Alcor suspension member since 1987. An attorney, Michael was gunned down in Los Angeles Law Library, slain by a disgruntled client he hardly knew. The client's 62-year-old James Sinclair had a grudge against the police for alleged misconduct, and also a history of mental problems. The 38-year-old Freeman had agreed to take his case when another attorney dropped it after being threatened. Still trying to familiarize himself and photocopying some documents, Freeman was shot, unfortunately. Michael Louis Friedman was an Alcor suspension member since 1987. Next slide. James Gallagher. Jim James. Jim was a software developer from Sunset Beach, California. Jim was a libertarian. He felt that the concept of government was inherently flawed. As he put it, "Since there will always be people that cheat, steal, pillage, maim, and murder. We are told society requires institutions that cheat, steal, pillage, maim, and murder to protect us from those people." A self-described Air Force brat, Jim served an enlistment of 3 years in the U.S. Army and got out in 1962 before he could be sent to Vietnam. He lived in Nicaragua and later the Bahamas before returning to California. He was CryoCare's first patient to be suspended. Paul Garfield and Jim Glennie. As time passed, the idea of cryonics began to appeal to Jim. He had always had faith in science and wanted to see the future and experience the rewards it could bring. When he discovered he had a life-threatening illness, he had no further doubts. He completed the necessary paperwork and became an Alcor member. Jim lived in Colorado, where he was a hydrogeologist. He specialized in mapping groundwater. Jim and his remarkable wife, Mary Margaret Kareniden, had chosen to fight Jim's illness with every possible resource. In the event there was only one choice left, to cryopreserve himself in the hope that he would be revived in the future when his illness could be cured. Gregory Grabsky, Hugh Hart, David Hayes. David was one of the original founders of Suspended Animation Incorporated and was a longtime member of Alcor. Due to David's youthful age of 46, his clinical death was referred to Palm Beach County's medical examiner's office. Though legal counsel, Alcor was successful in negotiating with the courts to allow for a virtual autopsy to be performed in place of a typical, more invasive procedure. After a CT scan was performed and the medical examiner was satisfied with the results, they agreed to release the body to Suspended Animation, who was working on Alcor's behalf. Curtis Henderson. Curtis graduated from Pennsylvania Military College and Temple University Law School. He passed the New York bar exam. He was a co-founder of the Cryonic Society of New York, CSNY, along with Saul Kent, James Sutton, and a designer named Carl Werner. At the organizational meeting, Carl Werner coined the word cryonics. Curtis soon became the president. Curtis and Saul Kent spent October 1966 touring the United States to assist in consolidation of the nascent cryonics movement. On October 2nd, they attended a meeting in Oak Park, Michigan, which led to the formation of the Cryonic Society of Michigan, with Robert Ettinger as president. On October 14th, they attended a meeting in Woodland Hills, California, where it was agreed to incorporate the Cryonic Society of California, with Robert Nelson as president.